Hi, welcome. Yeah, my name is Elwood Fisher. I'm one of the certification engineers here in Austin. Job shifted a little bit, but I'm still helping support the operations. Was developing certification exams and grading the CLD. So my understanding was this group's primary interest was on the CLD. So we're focusing in on that. I am drawing from our certification prep webinar, and the link there is at the bottom. And on these things, I always like to, if possible, yeah, there we go. Oh, too many screens going on. I don't find the chat. Okay, that'll be there, and if you like, I can put them in the chat after I'm no longer in the spotlight. I think that'll flow better. All right, so starting with certification, y'all are probably convinced already since you're at this meeting, but as far as why certify, the certification, we did some research a little while back, and of course there's industry research, and the certification does tend to produce improved work quality. Of course, there's the status from the certification. There's access to events and things like that. We'll be starting up once this COVID mess is over, and some new opportunities, some things like that. Certification helps standardize so that your boss knows, has a better idea of what you can do. For an organization, it's useful to have some standardization to the approach and understanding of the level of expertise of the people when you're assigning a project. And for the individual, what I've heard and talked to people is an awful lot of the benefit from certification is giving structure to the is the learning that occurs, and giving some structure to the learning that occurs when preparing for certification. So along those lines, I don't know if Dilbert has made it over there. It's a cartoon that has some insight, sometimes cynical about working as an engineer in a corporate setting. But the basics here is certification is not magic. So don't cheat yourself. A lot of the good comes from the preparation. Andreas after me will talk more about, how to prepare for the CLD, so I won't delve a lot into that. But take the time to learn and master, and don't just consider this a hoop to go through, and you'll be a lot better off for it, and certainly the people who work with you will be a lot better off for that. Okay, so Adrian had covered well the basic structure of the certifications, so I'm not going to dwell here. So we're looking at the CLD itself. What is the CLD, Certified LabVIEW Developer Exam? Let's start with some of the exam philosophy and how the exam's structured, a little bit of the logistics of how to take the exam, and now we'll talk some about the grading, which we always get questions about. All right, so the CLD, the basic structure of the challenge, you're given a specification and you have to code within 4 hours a solution to meet that specification. It has to be working code. If we get a broken arrow, that's a 0. We can't validate the functionality if it doesn't work at all. Basic idea is a sequencer. You're stepping through a series of states, and the order of those states will need to be configurable, either because the user has clicked on a button or the input file is read in a different input file. Okay. There, you'll need to be ready to do an IO file. In addition to reading, you may need to write to that file, and that may be a CSV file or an INI, which were considered too representative. You won't have to write to both of those on any given exam, but you don't know which exam you'll get. There are, at this point, I believe about 4 scenarios. You might get a microwave to code, or a vending machine, or a coffee machine. And different ones of those use different I/O formats. You have to respond to user interface within less than 100 milliseconds. We don't have a stopwatch, but if we notice the pause, then it's going to fail that. Okay. And you may need to count time down, and you may need to pause the time. So various elements. That's a quick overview of the type of challenge involved. Now, on that, the design patterns, Andreas will speak some to this. Typically, we see successful CLDs using either a state machine, queue-based event handler, or the producer-consumer with events. The queue-based event handler, the events help a lot with the responsiveness of the system. And a state machine you can do, but a state machine can lock up if you're not very careful. And on the learning side, you really ought to know how to use queues and events if you're going to call yourself a CLD. So on timing, there's execution timing, which is, I don't have my notes on this, and I tend to flip these. The execution timing is the countdown we've talked about, and software timing, I believe, is the putting in the pause millisecond in a loop, in your loops, so that your application has time to respond to user interface events. Mention the file I/O. You'll need to do error handling and documentation and style. Andreas, I believe, had mentioned he'll be covering. So, get there. Alrighty. So, what's it like to actually take this exam? We'll provide a PC with LabVIEW. Now, if you're taking the exam online, you'll be providing the computer, but we'll provide the virtual machine and the login. And there'll be a packet or directory, depending on whether you're taking in-person. In-person exams are not currently available. We do anticipate that they will eventually become available again. And so you get an exam specification that describes what you need to code, and you'll get a template VI that has the front panel and all of the controls, and you have to use and indicators. And you have to use those controls and indicators in the front panel. You don't modify those at all, because that's how we are going to grade it, is by interacting with that front panel. And if an I/O file is part of the grading, then that will also be provided. We will grade it using a different I/O file, still a CSV, so you can't hard code the values in that I/O. All right. Within the test itself, you're not allowed any external resources, so it's only LabVIEW and any resources within LabVIEW. So templates are allowed, and the help, LabVIEW help is allowed. Hopefully you don't have to take too much time looking things up. There's a certain level of familiarity with programming that's being tested, but you do have those available. You have 4 hours to do the working exam, so the recommendation is to code a working solution. Start with a frame, of course, a working solution, and develop the next increment of functionality and test it, which we believe is also testing the good developer habits, right? You have working code, you extend it, you test, you extend it, you test and verify. Okay. Do be careful. You need to save your work. If it's a packet, then the solution needs to be on that USB that we send, because that's all that we'll be able to grade. And if it's on the machine, then save to the directory indicated. Once the grading has been done, then we do allow some time for people to contact us and appeal. Then, the virtual machine is released, no longer exists, and of course the computers, if you're using one of our computers, will re-ghost them because we have to have them clear for the next person testing. So there we go. So overall strategies I mentioned: read the entire requirement section. Before the exam, read all of the, we call it boilerplate. I don't know what the term would be. The content that's the same every single time. The first 2 pages describe the exam and your non-disclosure agreement and all of that sort of thing. That's on the sample exams also, so familiarize yourself with that so you don't have to waste exam time reading, the legal background and the descriptions and all of that sort of thing. So in the first hour, first read through the entire requirement section, note what timing you're going to use and, what variables you'll need and things like that. Within the first hour of those 4 hours, you should have your working framework up. And then once you got that framework, then start adding in the functionality. But make sure that you use a framework that you're familiar with and have practiced doing sample exams with, and that is going to be large enough and responsive enough to cover all your requirements. Okay, so go here, and on the grading, CLD is graded on a little less than 40% on functionality, same amount on style, then on documentation. And I'm going to be leaning on Andreas to cover a little more on that. I'll focus in on a little more on the functionality on the grading. Okay, so as far as the mechanism of grading, we use VI Analyzer, and there are certain categories of, let's say, wire bends too close together or objects overlapping, so various categories, and there's a threshold. So if you have more than the allowed number of objects overlapping, then you'll lose the points that are allotted for that particular aspect of style. And so if you fail in a category, you lose those points. And on documentation, note that since it is automated, we verify that there is some text in the required locations, whether it's names of constants or things like that, and some comments, things like that. But we don't actually read those comments, so don't spend any time telling us how you would do the programming. Save that for the CLA, which is where we're verifying, that you know how to set up something, but it doesn't have to be a working solution. For the CLD, simply put some kind of text in there, do a one word. So what we're verifying is that you know how to use the documenting tools. I do recommend that you use best practice to actually document, at which point it'll be a habit, and during the exam you'll do your documenting. On functionality, what we verify is demonstrated functionality. So I like to say we push the buttons and watch the lights flash. It's a little bit more involved than that, but if it doesn't show up on the front panel, you won't get credit for it. So sometimes we get a solution that has a nice little sub VI that does everything that's required, that shows the count up or the count down or whatever's required, but they don't pass those values to the front panel. And so let you know ahead of time. The overall perspective is that this is like a demonstration or a proof of concept where your boss or a client has said, hey, how about we do a program that does this, 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 and this, and you're demonstrating, here's how it would look. And so it has to show up on the front panel, and similar to the style and documentation, functionality is split into categories, and within the categories there are subdivisions. And so we we verify, let's say one of the easiest one would be an initialization. Let's say there were 5 things that that we verify that you initialize, and you initialize correctly 4 of them. You'll get 80% of the points allotted for initialization. Okay, and there'll be a note that shows up that says full functionality, full initialization functionality not demonstrated. So it doesn't mean you lost all the initialization points. It means you missed something in there. So one thing to pay attention to, there are very few things that we can fix if a type def is not saved, but we can disconnect that type def, we will go through and do that because we can spot that easily, and that's a standardized correction. But we can't do a lot of troubleshooting because that wouldn't be fair. We can't do that consistently across the board. And so there we go. So again, say establish basic functionality, add the features modularly, and test each time. Okay. Right. And all right. I want to leave some time for some questions. And we have questions, and if someone could kindly translate if necessary. Probably not. Thank you, so.
Okay, where are the questions, guys? So
there is a question from my side.
Yeah, please.
Let me turn my camera on. When I took the CLD exam, which I unfortunately didn't pass it. It was like 2 years ago. I did some practice. I found some a set of training materials. They're like 15 or 17 lessons or whatever. So you have to program something, and it was like pretty old. I think it's like LabVIEW 7 or whatever. I think it's been more than 10 years since the date of release of that training material. So my question is, are there any new releases of this kind of training tutorials for the CLD?
There's not been new training material provided, as the CLD has actually not been updated either. And so okay. The training material should be sufficient for the exam. Yeah, those exercises are a sequence. Pretty sure Andreas will cover those, but yeah, they're a sequence that step up to the practice exams. So yeah, sorry, short answer. No, not.
Thank you.
Not more recent. Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, the question from again. What is the LabVIEW version you currently use when offering an exam?
Usually, it's the current version or one step back. So no more than one step back.
Okay, great.
So we don't. We're not early adapters because there are sometimes things that come up when you first have a new release, and on a certification exam, those could be pretty disastrous. But usually, just not even a full year, but like the half step back.
Okay.
You know?
It's okay. Yeah. Myself, I'm still programming in LabVIEW 18 most of the time. So as I learned, LabVIEW 19 is a little bit different in terms of like right mouse click drop down menu. For example, if you want to correct auto Y correcting, it's located in a little bit different place, or like create constant. Now create constant is on top of the list. And like when you're used to something and then suddenly you have something new, then like, oh God. So yeah, that's why I'm asking, so that I can spend like some time to do programming exactly in that LabVIEW version that that I'm going to have during the exam.
That's good input. I know the overall approach to programming with LabVIEW has not changed a lot, but I hadn't paid a lot of attention to the details on the menus, so that's good to know. Okay. Any other questions? Kind of a quick presentation. You'll get a little more on preparing specifically, particularly using the resources that are available. But any questions on certification in general? I'm available. I think we have a little more time allotted to me, or are we at the end of my time?
Oh, we can always make time for you. I think more of a remark than a question from my side is that I realize now how little preparation I took before I before I sat for the CLD exam. I can see now, looking back, I mean, hindsight is always 20/20, but I can see now how much easier my life would have been if I had just, like, I don't know, looked up the examples or looked at all these things. I knew nothing about the details you just gave us, Elwood, about what is graded, how much percentage goes to the style or whatever. And the interesting thing is, when I sat for the CLD, I found it quite okay, and I went out of the room with a very good feeling. And I passed it at the first try, but only barely. I think I had 73% or something like that, or 73 points. So I was quite disappointed, actually, because my feeling was very different. And I now realize that I just did so many things wrong because I didn't know any better in terms of documentation and whatnot. So I think it's really, maybe invaluable is a big word, but it's really worth your time to do a little preparation. Even if you're very proficient and if you know it all, still knowing what you guys are looking for will help so much with just doing the right thing during the exam. So yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing the details.
You're welcome.